Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
Darkness. A throbbing ache pounded behind his eyes as he slowly drifted into consciousness. He couldn't recall what happened the night before, just fragments of a night out at some local place called Barney's, faint impressions of a blonde woman, and a few too many drinks. Now, as he reached for the familiar shape of a bedside lamp, his hand caught nothing but empty air. Still half dazed, he blinked several times, expecting to be in his own bedroom, or at least in a friend's apartment. Instead, his fingers grasped at emptiness, and a strange hush swallowed the space around him. "Janice?" he said tentatively. That was the blonde's name, he was pretty sure. He remembered chatting with a woman named Janice at the bar, a bright sundress, a pleasant laugh. But now, silence. He tried again, voice cracking slightly. "Janice." No response. A sudden flash of light assaulted his eyes, causing him to flinch and shield them with his hand. He winced. It took several seconds for his vision to adjust, and when it did, he discovered that he was not in a place he recognized at all. He found himself in a small, featureless room. There was a single door on the far wall, no windows, and a dull, uniform color coating every surface. Beside the door was a coat rack and a toilet. A TV sat atop a low table, and a narrow twin bed was pushed against the wall. Everything looked strangely sterile. The sheets on the bed matched the plain walls, and apart from the chair near the TV, there was nothing else, not even his clothes. He realized with a flush of panic that he was stark naked. "Hello?" he called out, voice still tight. "Is anyone there?" No answer. The silence pressed in on him. He rose, wrapping himself in the bedsheet to cover his nudity. The door, maybe it was open. He moved toward it, tried the handle, and found it locked. He tried pounding on it, yelling, and received nothing in return but the hollow thud of his fists. After several minutes, he noticed a small button beside the doorframe, painted to match the wall. He pressed it, half expecting an alarm. Instead, a recorded voice crackled softly through a hidden speaker. "Good morning, Jamie. I'm sorry, but you cannot exit until you are ready to make your request." He pulled back, unsettled. "Ready? Ready for what? Let me out." He pressed the button again. The same recorded message repeated, calm and unchanging. He pressed it several more times, screaming at the unseen speaker. After a long bout of frustration and confusion, he gave up. His chest heaved, and the lingering headache made him lean against the wall. There had to be another clue. A mechanical hum snapped him from his thoughts. From the wall opposite the bed, a small panel slid open, revealing a tray with food and a glass of water. Toast, scrambled eggs, and a couple of small links of sausage. The sight might have been comforting under normal circumstances, but here it felt ominous. He grabbed the water first, gulping it down. He nearly threw the plate at the door, but hunger forced him to reconsider. He put the plate on the table, then paced the room, trying to think. He ran through his last solid memory. He had been at Barney's, chatting up Janice. She'd been fun, and he'd drunk more than usual. But this, a locked room, no explanation. A disembodied voice? Had someone kidnapped him? He tried to recall if Janice had left the bar with him. He couldn't remember. In frustration, he flung his voice into the silence again. "What do you want from me?" No reply. Time passed slowly. The television turned on easily, but it displayed nothing too informative. Some dull, daytime dramas he barely paid attention to. He checked the toilet, discovered it flushed automatically under certain conditions, and found a roll of toilet paper and a moist towel concealed behind a panel that responded whenever he sat. The entire place was mechanized, carefully monitored. Eventually, evening must have come, because the overhead light dimmed. Another panel delivered dinner, a simple meal and more water. He ate quietly this time, forcing himself not to waste the food. After a few hours of pacing, yelling at the door, and checking every inch of the walls for a hidden camera or latch, the lights went out completely. He found his way back to the bed and lay there, staring into darkness, unsure of how to escape or even what he was supposed to do. Outside, there was no sound, no hint of rescue. He slept fitfully. Strange dreams hovered at the edges of his mind, images he couldn't fully recall in the morning, vague figures and shifting shapes. He woke with a start, looked around, and confirmed he was still trapped. Breakfast appeared again. He ate and pressed the button by the door. The same voice. "Good morning, Jamie. When you are ready to go, simply ask and the door will open." "Open it now," he demanded. "I'm sorry, Jamie. You're not ready," the recording answered serenely. Not ready. Ready for what? He looked around the small room and noticed the only clothing available, a feminine robe in pale yellow, hanging on the coat rack. He had resisted wearing it the previous day, preferring the sheet, but the sheet was cumbersome and offered no solution. He hated this feeling of vulnerability, of having no control. Reluctantly, he pulled the robe off its hanger and slipped it on. It was delicate, clearly meant for a woman, and it fit oddly, but it covered him better than the sheet. Maybe this was some kind of twisted test. He approached the door again. "Can I go?" he asked in a calmer tone. The door clicked and swung open. His heart pounded. That worked? Stepping through, he found himself in another room just like the first. He turned around. His old room was closed off now. This new space had similar furnishings, and on the wall was a new water dispenser with a small cup. The television here had different channels. He noticed that the bland soap operas were replaced by different programming now. Strange lifestyle shows featuring people dressing in various outfits, talking about grooming and personal presentation, detailing etiquette, posture, and other refinement tips. Unease coiled in him. They were guiding him towards something. The robe, the clothes, the forced waiting. Now the TV was showing shows about fashion and grooming routines. The water he drank had a peculiar aftertaste. Whenever he pressed the door button now, a recorded voice told him he wasn't ready. There seemed to be a pattern. Each time he made a small concession, like wearing the robe, the door would open to the next room. What would be next? Time in these rooms was strange. Meals arrived at regular intervals. With each passing day, if they were days, he noticed subtle changes in himself. His hair seemed longer, though he couldn't be sure. His nails seemed more delicate. He felt sluggish sometimes, and other times strangely calm. He tried to resist the routines forced upon him, but thirst and hunger were strong motivators. The water's odd taste lingered, but he needed it too badly to refuse. Another door opened after a few cycles. He moved into a new room that contained a small rack of clothing. All the garments were women's clothes, skirts, blouses, undergarments that no man would wear casually. At first, he refused to put them on. He spent hours pressing the door button, yelling. The same voice repeated, "You are not ready." Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, he gave in. He slipped on the provided underwear and found it oddly snug. The bra felt strange, but there was some fullness to his chest now that made it fit better than expected. The blouse and skirt were delicate and well-tailored. He tried the door again. It opened, revealing yet another room. With each room, the demands became clearer. The TV now displayed tutorials on proper posture and high heels, shows about makeup application, hairstyle tips, and voice modulation exercises. The rooms provided him with tools, each carefully timed. First a brush for his growing hair, then cosmetics to apply to his changing face. The water dispenser changed forms, forcing him to adjust how he got his drink. Sometimes it was placed at an awkward angle, and he had to bend, stand on his toes, or kneel in a particular posture to drink. Each time he tried to resist, he ended up dehydrated and desperate enough to follow the implied instructions. He noticed changes in his body more clearly now. His face had softened. His shoulders had narrowed. His once flat chest now bore a gentle curve. Even his voice sounded different, lighter, higher pitched. The clothes fit better and better as time passed. He found himself moving with more grace, simply because it was easier to get through the day. He tried to ignore what that meant, tried to focus on escape, but there was no visible exit. The television's content guided him along. First, how to walk in heels, then how to apply subtle makeup, then how to select outfits that flattered a feminine figure. He scoffed at it at first, angry and resentful, but the locked door responded only when he conformed. When he put on the right outfit, a flowing skirt and a matching blouse, and walked smoothly across the room in the heels without stumbling, the door would finally open to the next stage. One day, a new element appeared, a more elaborate dressing table with an array of cosmetics and mirrors. The instructions on the TV became more detailed, complex makeup routines, hairstyling techniques, selecting colors that matched one's complexion. He resisted, but thirst and isolation whittled away at his defiance. He practiced applying lipstick and eyeliner, tried different blush tones, carefully fixed his hair. The door remained closed until he achieved a look that matched the models on the screen. Time blurred. He slept in rooms furnished with increasingly luxurious bedding. He woke to gentle instructions from the television, hinting that he should dress in certain combinations. Sometimes the door opened only after he styled his hair in a particular way. Other times only after he practiced walking or speaking phrases softly and clearly. He discovered that if he stood straight, smiled gently, and spoke softly, the voice behind the door would congratulate him before allowing him to proceed. He never saw who provided the food and water. It always emerged from hidden panels. Occasionally, he would lose track of how many rooms he passed through. Each was almost identical, but slightly more comfortable, encouraging more elaborate routines. Sometimes he found small cards instructing him on grooming techniques or gentle exercises that, over time, reshaped his posture, making his movements more fluid and his presence more subdued. In one room, he found a closet full of outfits, dresses, skirts, blouses, undergarments, heels in various heights. The television ran loops of people dressing impeccably, maintaining immaculate appearances, and carrying themselves with refined dignity. He understood the pattern. The doors only opened when he looked and acted a certain way, as if he were passing a series of tests. Each test advanced him further along a path he never chose. His dreams were filled with strange scenarios, elegant parties where he wore evening gowns, polite dinners where he conversed quietly with well-dressed individuals he could not quite recognize. These weren't violent nightmares, but they were unsettling in their inevitability. He was drifting into a role he never wanted. He also became aware that he was being monitored. Subtle shifts in the environment responded to his behavior. If he tried to wear his old robe carelessly, the door wouldn't open. If he attempted to drink water in a sloppy way, the fountain would malfunction, until he corrected his posture. If he ever raised his voice in anger, the television's volume would drown him out, forcing him to calm down before the day's meal arrived. Over what must have been many weeks, his body underwent a complete transformation. His hair now brushed well below his shoulders in soft golden waves. His facial features had softened into something undeniably feminine. His shoulders were slimmer, waist narrower, and hips gently curved. The clothes fitted perfectly now. He could no longer pass as the man he once was. He had tried to resist, but the isolation and the subtle conditioning had changed him, inside and out. He avoided thinking about what it all meant. He focused on the immediate tasks. If he blended the eyeshadow properly, if he chose the right earrings from a small selection that appeared one morning, perhaps the door would open. If he maintained a graceful gait, another door might lead to a room with a better bed. He seldom asked himself why this was happening or who was behind it. It hurt too much to dwell on the bigger picture. One morning, after completing a carefully executed makeup routine and dressing in a modest blouse and knee-length skirt, he pressed the door button. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a different voice responded, masculine, calm, and direct. "Jamie, today you will move on. Make sure you are fully prepared." He didn't know what that meant. Prepared for what? He looked around and saw a new item had appeared, a small kit with instructions on personal hygiene and presentation. He followed the instructions meticulously, washing himself thoroughly in the small shower that had appeared in a previous room, ensuring his clothes were neatly pressed and redoing his hair until it shone. He had grown accustomed to these tasks, and while he disliked them, he understood that completion of these steps allowed progress. After finishing, he pressed the button by the door again. The door slid open. Heart pounding, he stepped through and found himself in a larger room, more like a lounge. There was a soft rug on the floor, a tall mirror on one wall, and a comfortable chair. On a low table stood a pitcher of water and a delicate glass. He poured himself a drink and sipped slowly, examining his reflection. The person looking back was barely recognizable. Long hair, subtle makeup, graceful features. The clothes were elegant and feminine. He could almost believe this was someone else entirely. A new door opened on the opposite side of the room. He stepped through and entered a space with a wide window. Sunlight streamed in, making him squint after all that time under artificial lighting. For a moment he felt hope surge. Sunlight meant outside, and outside meant escape. He rushed to the window and peered out. They were somewhere remote. He could see open desert, a stark horizon, and nothing else. No cityscape, no neighbors, no roads that he could discern. Just emptiness. Footsteps behind him. He turned and saw two people. One was a woman with neatly styled blonde hair, wearing professional attire. She looked vaguely familiar. He frowned, trying to recall. Barney's, the bar. Had this been Janice, the woman he'd spoken to? The other figure was a tall man, smartly dressed, arms crossed, considering him with a calm smile. They stood by the door he had just passed through, as if waiting for him to notice them. "Janice?" he ventured quietly, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. She nodded, expression neutral. "Good to see you again, Jamie. I trust the preparations have gone well." Preparations? He looked down at himself and felt suddenly exposed. His posture, his attire, all of it carefully molded over countless days. He tried to speak, but his voice came out softer than he remembered. What is all this?" The man stepped forward and examined him closely, walking around him as if inspecting a piece of craftsmanship. "The transformation is nearly complete," he said, addressing Janice. I must say the conditioning has been very thorough. You've outdone yourself. Jamie's stomach knotted. He tried to ask who they were and what they wanted, but his voice trembled, and he found himself unconsciously maintaining the refined posture he had been taught. He wanted to lash out, to demand answers, but something inside him hesitated. After everything, he felt weak and uncertain. Janice turned to the man. We can arrange the procedure soon. The steps we discussed will finalize the transition. Of course, as per our agreement, you'll have full rights once everything is complete. Janice paused, correcting herself. Jamie is over 18, healthy, and thoroughly trained. Jamie's eyes widened. Over 18? Trained? He tried to protest, but the man raised a hand, and Jamie found himself falling silent. He had been taught to respond to certain cues. He wasn't sure how or when, but he knew that raising his voice now wouldn't help. He remembered instructions from the television, from the daily tasks, all carefully designed to steer his behavior. The man nodded. Understood. We'll proceed with the arrangements in about a month's time. Until then, I'll be taking Jamie with me. I want to ensure everything meets my standards. He looked Jamie in the eye, and though Jamie wanted to pull away, he held still, rooted in place by the habit of compliance. You'll learn how to behave in a more social setting. The environment you've been in was just to prepare you. Jamie felt his pulse race. He wanted to protest, to say he wasn't anyone's property, to ask what they had done to his body. But as he opened his mouth, he faltered. He could guess what would happen if he resisted. The man's calm confidence suggested he was in complete control. Janice stepped forward and brushed a strand of Jamie's hair back into place. You've come a long way since Barney's, she said in a quiet voice. I remember you, so confident, so sure of yourself. Now look at you. You're ready for a new role. She handed Jamie a small hand mirror. He looked at his reflection and saw a graceful figure, elegantly dressed, with carefully styled hair and delicate features, a figure that no one would associate with the person he used to be. Tears pricked at his eyes, but he held them back. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Yet what choice did he have? All the doors had only opened after he played by their rules. He had no allies here, no exit he could see. The desert outside looked unforgiving, and these two people, Janice and the man, controlled everything. Let's go, the man said, placing a firm hand on Jamie's shoulder and guiding him through another door. This one led to a corridor and then outside. The blast of warm desert air hit him, and he looked around. A plain concrete building behind them, no sign, no landmarks, nothing but dust and emptiness. Parked beside the building was a sleek car. The man opened the passenger door and gestured for Jamie to get in. Jamie hesitated, then glanced back toward Janice. She stood at the building's door, arms folded. She gave a curt nod, and then closed the door behind her. It sealed with a metallic clang that echoed in the still air. With a quiet sigh, Jamie stepped into the car and sat down. The man got in beside him, started the engine, and began driving across a dusty track that passed for a road. Jamie stared at his reflection in the car's side mirror. His new appearance was undeniable. The clothes were elegant. He wore a fitted skirt, a blouse that complemented his hair, and subtle makeup that enhanced his new features. He hadn't chosen any of this. The man's voice was calm, almost pleasant. Your training in there was just the beginning. You'll continue to learn how to present yourself, how to speak, how to dress. I have plans for you, Jamie. He wanted to ask why, wanted to plead, to say he remembered who he once was and that he wanted his old life back. But something held him back. Perhaps it was fear of punishment. Perhaps it was the lingering effects of whatever conditioning they had used. He He had noticed subtle changes in his emotions, a strange pull that kept him from rebelling openly. He remembered the first moments, waking up naked in a small room, the frustration and anger. That felt like a lifetime ago. He had been systematically stripped of his sense of normality and forced into this new role. The cross-dressing, the grooming, the gradual feminization, none of it had been his choice. He'd been coerced, one tiny step at a time, until the sum of those steps left him entirely transformed. The car bumped along for a while. He tried to form a question, something that wouldn't trigger a harsh response. What will happen now? He asked softly, his own voice surprising him with its gentle tone. The man considered him for a moment, then replied, "You'll live with me. For now, consider it an extended stay. You'll have more freedom than you had in that facility, though your choices remain limited. I've invested in you, Jamie. I'll expect you to follow my guidelines and meet certain standards of appearance and behavior. In time, there may be further procedures to refine your presentation. The details will be made clear." Jamie looked out the window. The desert stretched endlessly, dust swirling behind the car's tires. He remembered the voice on the speaker calling him Jamie. He wasn't sure if that was even his original name or if they'd given it to him. He vaguely recalled that his name was Jamie, but now it sounded different, as if belonging to this new persona they'd molded him into. He felt the weight of his transformed body. The subtle swish of the skirt's fabric against his legs, the gentle pull of the bra straps over his shoulders, the tiny pinch of the heels. None of it was uncomfortable now. He had adapted too well. That realization made him feel ill. He had become what they wanted, docile, shaped, and controlled. The man slowed the car as they approached a paved road. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. He flipped through it and nodded, as if confirming directions. Jamie wondered how far they would drive, where the man lived, and what future awaited him there. He dared not imagine too far ahead, not after everything he had endured. In the distance, he could see a glimmer of some settlement, low buildings, a vague suggestion of civilization. He suspected that once he arrived wherever they were going, his isolation would not end. He would be monitored closely, no doubt forced to continue dressing and behaving according to someone else's desires. The details of his old life, his old identity, seemed distant and fading. He recalled the initial confusion, the attempts at escape, and how futile they were. The pattern was clear: comply, change, move forward. No one had come to rescue him, and it seemed no one would. As the car picked up speed on the paved road, the man glanced at him. "You'll have responsibilities," he said. "Nothing too complicated at first. Helping maintain my home, ensuring your appearance is always perfect, accompanying me when necessary. Your presence will reflect on me, and I expect you to maintain the standards set during your training." Jamie nodded mutely. His reflection in the mirror was calm. Inside, he felt churned up, but he had learned that open defiance led nowhere. He would need to be careful, watchful, and patient if he was ever to understand the full truth of what had happened, and if there was any possible way out. They drove in silence for some time. The sun rose higher, bathing the desert in harsh light. Eventually, the man made a turn down a side road. Jamie caught sight of a large house or estate, a building with high walls, neatly kept grounds. It looked peaceful, scenic, and completely contained. No neighbors in sight, no easy escape. As they passed through a gated entrance, Jamie realized this was his new prison. Larger, more comfortable, but a prison nonetheless. The man parked the car and stepped out, gesturing for Jamie to follow. Jamie exited carefully, smoothing his skirt, adjusting his posture as he'd been trained. A pair of staff members, both dressed in crisp uniforms, approached. They barely glanced at Jamie, as if this scenario was completely normal. The man gave them brief instructions to bring in the luggage that had apparently been sent ahead. Luggage? Jamie felt disoriented. They must have prepared this move well in advance, planning everything. The staff opened the trunk and removed a few suitcases. He suspected they contained more clothes, tools, whatever was needed to maintain his new image. "Come along," the man said gently, leading Jamie into the house. Inside it was quiet, elegantly furnished, and spacious. He could see large windows, plush sofas, decorative art pieces. The interior contrasted sharply with the sparse rooms he'd been confined in before. Here, every detail seemed chosen for comfort and prestige. He wondered if this shift was supposed to reassure him or simply to make compliance easier. They entered a sitting room where a large mirror hung on the wall. The man paused and turned Jamie toward the mirror. "Look at yourself," he said quietly. Jamie did. He saw a poised figure, long blonde hair brushed neatly, makeup subtle and effective, a well-chosen outfit that accentuated a graceful form. The reflection showed a person who looked confident, elegant, and composed. It showed someone who had mastered walking in heels, someone who knew how to choose a flattering outfit. It didn't show the turmoil inside. The man stepped behind Jamie, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "In time, this will all feel normal," he said. "You might not remember your old life clearly, but you'll thrive in this one." Jamie stiffened, but said nothing. Could he hold on to who he was before? Or was that person lost, subsumed by all the conditioning and subtle manipulations? The man guided Jamie deeper into the home and showed him a room, a bedroom lined with a vanity, a dressing table, and a wardrobe filled with clothes and accessories. He opened the wardrobe doors, revealing dresses, blouses, skirts, scarves, shoes neatly arranged. Jamie recognized the style, similar to what he'd been trained with, but even more refined. Clearly, they wanted him to live this role fully now. Before leaving Jamie to settle in, the man turned at the doorway. "I'll have tasks for you, and we'll discuss them soon. For now, rest, change if you like, and gather yourself. I expect you in the drawing room in an hour, understand?" Jamie nodded. The man left, closing the door softly. Alone, Jamie walked to the vanity and sat down, looking at the image in the mirror. He touched a lock of his hair, felt the smoothness of his blouse's fabric, took in the scent of expensive perfume that clung to the room. Everything was designed to keep him in this role. The cross-dressing wasn't temporary. It had become his new daily life. He had been shaped into this person, refined manners, careful grooming, all to meet the demands of these strangers. He thought about the desert they had driven through, about the closed-off building he had left behind, about Janice's face and the calm, businesslike manner in which she had spoken. None of them had hesitated in treating him like a crafted product. He realized the training had been thorough, not just in changing his outward appearance, but in instilling habits, the posture, the willingness to comply, the reliance on instructions. He had no allies, no information, no leverage. The silence of the room pressed around him. In the mirror, his expression faltered. He wanted to shout, to rip off the clothes and run, but knew it would do nothing. The house was guarded, isolated. The man seemed to have all the control. Even Janice, who he'd met at the bar that night, was involved in this elaborate manipulation. He closed his eyes, remembering that initial moment of confusion in the tiny room. Then, he had still felt like himself, defiant and sure of who he was. Now, those memories felt distant. An hour later, he would go to the drawing room as instructed. He would presumably sit quietly while the man explained his duties, his schedule, and what was expected of him. He would nod and obey, because he saw no viable alternative. But inside, he vowed to remember that this was done to him, not chosen by him. Perhaps one day he could find a way out. Perhaps one day he could challenge them. For now, he would survive, play the part, and wait for any opportunity, however small. He reached for a hairbrush on the vanity and began brushing his hair, a reflex learned in captivity. Each stroke of the brush smoothed his appearance, just as each forced concession had smoothed away the rough edges of his old identity. He placed the brush down, steadying himself. Outside, the house was quiet. He stood, walked to the door, and prepared to follow the man's command. In that moment, he knew the final step of their plan had succeeded. He now behaved as they had trained him to, taking careful steps in heels, wearing clothes that no one had forced onto him in that final moment, but that he had chosen because he knew resistance would fail. The journey from a locked cell with a single robe to this grand house filled with elegant outfits had been paved with steady, relentless conditioning. And now, as he stepped out to meet the man who called himself Master without ever uttering the word explicitly, Jamie realized he was no longer simply a bystander in his own transformation. He had become an instrument of their design, shaped for their purposes. He walked softly down the hallway, guided by the lessons drilled into him by silent rooms and locked doors. The day was bright, the house cool, and the world outside vast and empty. He might appear calm, but inside questions crowded his mind. He carried them silently, carefully, as he had learned to do everything. There would be no dramatic escape at this moment, no sudden rescue, just the quiet click of heels on polished floors and a future shrouded in uncertainty. At least he understood one thing clearly. Whatever life awaited him, it would be on their terms. He paused at the top of a staircase, took a calming breath, and descended, each graceful step exactly as he had been trained. He reached the drawing room door, ready to face the man who waited within, dressed and groomed as the perfect figure they had molded him to be. He turned the handle, entered, and let the door close behind him. No one had to say anything. The conditioning was complete.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.